Hello and welcome to English 101. I'll be your instructor, Dr. Sam Lackey, and this is the Week 1 lecture. So here today I would just like to introduce the class, talk a little bit generally about what we're going to be doing in here, our weekly routine, and just cover some of the basics. And we'll also talk about our Week 1 material, some key concepts and ideas that we need to keep in mind throughout the semester. So obviously this is composition 1. Composition really just means writing. So our primary focus in this class is to improve our writing skills. And there's a lot that goes into that. One way to improve as writers is to improve as readers. And that's another thing that we're going to try to accomplish in 101. So here in week 1, we really kind of start with some reading concepts because we're going to be reading throughout the semester. We're often going to be reading in order to reinforce the writing techniques that we are learning about and practicing. And really, reading and writing go together. They are so closely related. If we want to improve in one, we really need to improve in the other as well. And they're often going to reinforce each other. So we do have one required book for the class. Hopefully it will be arriving soon. The book is called 50 Essays, the 6th edition. So ultimately, I'm hoping everybody will be able to get a copy of the book because that's where all of our reading assignments come from. Here in week 1, we're going to do sort of an alternative assignment, but beginning in week 2, we really need the book so we can complete our assigned readings. So I know we're dealing with a little bit of a book shortage right now, so we might still be waiting on our books to arrive. That's fine. Like I said, here in week 1, we can live without them. We can live without the book, but by next week it would be great if we have them. If we don't, that's obviously beyond our control, and we will just adapt and figure out how we're going to do the readings. I can always provide some readings for you guys, as we're waiting for the books. So here in week 1, I want to start with some ideas, some strategies, some concepts that are going to help you guys improve as readers. And then as you improve as readers, you're going to be able to learn, you're going to be able to learn how to use a lot of the things that you are observing, things that you are identifying in the essays that we read. You're going to be able to use a lot of that stuff once we start writing essays a little bit later on. So one thing that hopefully you'll be able to see here in week 1, I've sent the syllabus. Hopefully everybody is able to receive a copy. We're not going to go through the course syllabus, sentence by sentence, but just take a look at your copy. I've gone over, some of the basic parameters of the class, and also you can see a detailed course schedule located within the syllabus. It starts around like page 4 or page 5. You really need to look at that course schedule if you want to get sort of a bigger picture of what we're doing this semester, what we're going to be doing week by week, because I tell you exactly what we are covering each week, what we are reading each week, and also when all of our major writing assignments will be due. So all the due dates are there, all of the assignments are there, so you might want to check out that schedule, and it can certainly come in handy in the future. A few other things to look for in the syllabus, just basic course policies that we all need to follow, but also a list of all of our assignments, all of our major essays. We have 4 of them, along with weekly sort of responses, or what we would call maybe discussion posts, in a sort of traditional class. And here we're not going to be able to actually talk as a group. We're not necessarily going to be able to respond to each other, but you guys will be able to respond to questions that I give you about the readings on a weekly basis. So we have kind of a weekly discussion, and then we have our 4 big papers. that we'll be completing over the course of this semester. And if you look at the schedule, you'll notice that we break the semester up into 4 units. And those units are based on different writing styles, different writing techniques, different types of writing. So we start with Unit 1 with narrative. That's our first type of writing, that's our first style, our first technique, and we're going to start talking about it next week in week 2. After we spend some time on narrative, we move on to analysis. That is Unit 2. Then we move on to Unit 3, which is comparison. It's mostly comparing and contrasting, but we also incorporate a few other writing strategies as well, sort of related things. And then finally, Unit 4 is argumentative writing. And that's going to get you ready for English 102, which is largely based on research and argumentative writing. So some of you, those of you, I would hope most of you are going on to take 102 eventually. So 101 is a good sort of preparation. It gets you ready for what's to come next. So that's how we are moving through the semester. We're going to be covering those 4 major writing types. So our procedure is kind of the same for each unit. We start by reading a few examples of that style of writing from 50 essays. So that's how our weekly reading assignments are going to help us. We can look at examples of narrative. We're going to be reading examples of analysis and comparison and all of these different styles. So we can learn a lot from looking at professionally done examples of these types of writing. And then we're going to be practicing. We're going to have some assignments, those weekly discussion posts, like I said, or we can think of them more as responses, sort of personal responses. Those give us a chance to start getting some of our ideas down on paper, and then eventually we're going to start working on a major essay near the end of each unit. So once we've learned about narrative, read some examples of narrative, done some practice with narrative, it'll be time to write our narrative essay at the end of the unit, and then we sort of repeat that same basic process for units 2, 3, and 4. So I like to keep the schedule pretty simple. I like consistency. I like us to sort of get into a regular weekly routine that we can repeat throughout the semester. So hopefully that's what we'll be able to do. At the beginning of each week, you guys should receive the lecture notes and the assignment details for that week, along with the reading assignment. So you can basically have the entire week to get all of our work done for that week. So you'll have the entire week to complete the reading, to complete your response, and then if there's another assignment due, if one of our big papers is due, of course we're going to be working on that as well. But you might notice on our schedule, we sort of devote the last week of each unit to writing the paper for that unit. The narrative essay, the analysis, the comparative essay, and finally the argumentative paper. So we're always going to spend time working, outlining, drafting, working on those papers during the last week of each unit. So hopefully we can get comfortable and familiar with this routine, and we can sort of repeat it throughout the semester. So yeah, take a look at that syllabus. If you have any questions about anything that's in there, hopefully you'll be able to communicate those questions to me, maybe through Victoria or through whoever else is sort of working with you guys at the facility. I'll always try to answer questions and provide feedback through these proper channels as quickly as I can. All right, so let's talk a little bit about our week 1 stuff. I generally try to keep it pretty light in week 1 so we can all ease into the class, sort of read over the syllabus, get comfortable with sort of what we're doing in here. But I do want us to start thinking more about active reading and critical thinking. These are 2 really important principles for us that are going to remain important throughout the semester. So when I talk about active reading, that's really going to help us, like I said, improve as readers, but it's also going to allow us to better comprehend and retain the information that we read. So then we'll be able to use that info later when it's time for us to do our major writing assignment. So you guys can already read. I don't have to teach you how to do that. But oftentimes when we read, especially if we are reading for pleasure, if we are just reading to pass the time, often we'll be reading passively. And I think we probably know what that means. If we're passive, that means that we're not taking a very active role. We're just sort of letting things happen to us. So if we are reading passively, that means that we are reading. We are reading the words on the page, and we probably understand what we're reading, but we might not be paying 100% attention to the text. And more importantly, because we're passive, we're getting the main ideas, but we are almost immediately forgetting details and specifics because we're just kind of lazily scanning the words. We understand what's happening, but we might not be devoting a lot of time or effort to the reading. And another hallmark of passive reading is to do it without writing anything down. So that's really where I want to start today as we talk about active reading. To be a good active reader, you really want to have your pen in hand. And they talk about this in the introductory chapter of 50 essays, which I've provided for you guys. That's what I want you to read here in week 1. So I've provided a PDF version of that intro chapter. So in that chapter, they talk about active reading and they talk about critical thinking, the two areas that we're going to cover now. So when we start discussing active reading, we need to start with a pen or pencil in hand because we need to write stuff down as we are reading. That's very important. That's a big part of active reading. So the book talks about underlining and annotating as we read. So underlining is a pretty simple concept. You're simply drawing attention to the most important aspects of a text. You're underlining important words, important sentences, maybe phrases, things that get repeated, things that seem very important to you, or maybe just very interesting, very thought-provoking. You want to learn more about them. So when we talk about underlining, we can really be circling, we can be underlining, we can be putting things in brackets, we can be highlighting. We might be somewhat constrained as far as what kind of supplies we have, but all we need is to do some kind of marking system to draw attention to the most important parts of whatever it is that we are reading. So there aren't a lot of rules. You don't need to underline everything, but you need to underline the stuff that is most important to you. And certainly, if you feel like you're identifying a main idea, a really big, important idea that's at work in that text, underline it. If you think you find the author's argument or overall point, you definitely want to underline that, their thesis, if you think they have one. But also, it's a very subjective process. So you can also simply underline things that matter to you, things that are interesting to you. It doesn't necessarily matter if other people would have underlined those exact same things. If they're interesting, compelling, or important to you, you can certainly underline them. Also, if you come across something that you don't recognize, if you come across a word or a reference to a person or a place or an event that you're not familiar with, you might want to underline or circle that too. And maybe later on you'll get a chance to find out what it is. We don't always find the answers to some of those questions, but if you're able to maybe look up the word at some future date or find out what something means, you can always return to your notes and add a little bit more. And that's another thing that we want to do. In addition to underlining, we also want to create some notes. And that's really all annotating means. In the book, they talk about underlining, annotating, and asking questions. So these are all very related practices. As we're circling or underlining, we also want to jot down some notes. So when we're looking at our book, we can really do this in the margins of our pages. We can, start writing things down. Sorry, I wanted to grab my book just to kind of show you. It's very easy to do this. As we're reading, we can just jot down some notes, some observations, some thoughts in the margins of the page, the white space, above, below, or beside the main text. So it's just an easy way to get some of our thoughts down on paper. So if we find a really important sentence that we want to underline, it would be nice to put a little note next to that underlined sentence. Why did you underline it? What's important about it? What do you think about it? Make a little note. These can be very informal. There's not a lot of rules when it comes to annotating. You can use your own sort of shorthand system. You don't necessarily have to write in complete sentences. Now, everything that you submit to me, all of the major assignments that you turn in, of course, will be in complete sentences, complete paragraphs, but your notes are never going to be turned in. Your notes are just for you. They are just helping you to read whatever it is you're reading. So you can use your own system, your own shorthand. You can abbreviate words. You can use bullet points. You can write sort of fragmented thoughts. And again, it really doesn't matter. It's just whatever will help you. Whatever will help you to remember what you're reading. That's really why we do this. That's why being an active reader is so important. Studies have shown that even people with good memories have a difficult time retaining information that they've read. That's just something about the human brain. It's difficult for us to remember a lot of stuff if we just read it, especially if we just read it passively, especially if a lot of time passes. Imagine reading an essay now, not writing anything down, okay, reading it passively, and then trying to talk about it or write about it a month from now. It would be very difficult. You would almost have to go back and reread the text. You'd have to start from scratch. Even if you remembered the main idea, which you probably would, you would remember some of the big things about it. But if you don't underline, if you don't annotate, if you're not reading actively, you're not going to remember a lot of the details. You're not going to remember a lot of specific aspects. So all you can really do is talk in a general way about what you read. But see, this way, with active reading, if you're underlining and you're annotating, what you're doing really is creating a written record that you can return to at any time. And you're going to be able to find the most important parts of the essay and what you had to say about those important parts. So you're going to be able to save yourself time later if you have to return to a text and write about it. So again, you can write whatever you want as notes. You can say, I don't understand what the author is saying in this paragraph. You can say, I agree with what he's saying here, or I disagree. I think what she is trying to say here is blank. You can do a little translation, take, what you're reading and maybe sort of put it into your own words. I think what the author means here is blank. Relate some of this stuff to yourself when possible. This reminds me of blank. This makes me think of blank. That's good stuff because that will help you to remember. So the final step of active reading that they talk about in the book, like I said, is asking questions. So once you've reached the end of the essay, you get to the final page. If you have any remaining questions that you have not already written down in the margins as part of your annotations, it would be good to go ahead and jot those questions down once you're finished reading. And like I said, we might be able to answer some of those questions, and other questions might remain unanswered. But by jotting those questions down, you can give yourself a little bit of direction. There might be a few things you want to learn about. There might be a few things you just need to think more about. You might be able to provide the answer yourself with a little bit more thought and reflection. So you can return to those questions later. In some cases, maybe you can answer them, maybe not. But it's good to have them written down, again, so you don't forget. A question might occur to you, but if you don't write it down, chances are you're going to lose it, you're going to forget it, and then you're kind of missing an opportunity to potentially learn something more. So those are just some simple strategies that I want us to start utilizing with all of our reading assignments. So for week 1, I've provided a reading assignment. We're doing the intro chapter. I want you guys to look at that. But I've also provided a short article about a real life event that happened in Nevada not too long ago. And I want you guys to just use that article to help you practice some of these active reading techniques. So you guys can read the article, do these things, underline, annotate, ask questions, and then using those active reading strategies, using your notes, using what you've written down, I just want you to answer some basic questions about the article. Tell me a few things about the article. But again, use your active reading stuff to help you answer the questions. And hopefully this can just become a habit. And we can start doing these active reading strategies for everything that we read, especially once we get our books and we can start doing our normal weekly reading assignments. Okay, so another concept that they talk about in the intro chapter 250 essays is critical thinking, which is something we've probably heard about. We've probably heard this term before, but we sort of want to use the exact definition that we find in the book because, of course, we use critical thinking all the time. It's good to think critically about everything, but in this class, we're sort of talking about 3 specific areas, and they go through these in the chapter. They talk about being inquisitive, being evaluative, and being, at least sometimes, being skeptical. So let's just run through what those terms mean. To be inquisitive means that you are asking questions, right? To inquire or to make inquiries is to ask questions. You're trying to figure something out. You're trying to ask questions in order to discover the truth or the true meaning behind something. So it's always good to be inquisitive. You're trying to understand. And some of these essays in the book are going to be, at times, sort of difficult to understand. And that's okay, because reading, just like writing, is a process. It's an ongoing thing. We don't really do it all at once. Some essays might require 2 readings. Sometimes you have to think about it a little bit more before you have a full grasp on the meaning. That's okay. A lot of students get nervous if they have questions. If there's something that they're not sure about, sometimes they're reluctant to ask because they think, oh, if I have a question, that means I'm failing to understand, I'm not doing something right, I'm going to be criticized, I'm going to get a bad grade, or whatever. But that's really not true. It's good to ask questions. Teachers generally want their students to have questions because that means, we don't want, certain questions that are obvious, but we want good questions, because that means that students are engaged. They are thinking. They are trying to work their way through problems. They're trying to figure stuff out. If there are no questions, that often means that we're not really paying attention and we're not thinking hard enough about the text to even come up with any questions about it. Because, if you're thinking, if you're interested, if you're active, you're going to have a question or 2, even if you have a pretty good overall understanding of what the essay is saying. So we like questions. Questions are good. The next quality that we want to have is we want to be evaluative. You guys know what the word evaluation means, right? So in your role as student in this class, you get to make some evaluations when it comes to the stuff that we read. You get to evaluate what these authors are saying. Do you agree with what they are saying? Do you disagree? What are your reasons? You can have any position you want as long as you have some evidence to back up your claims, your views, your position. So some of these authors are going to really resonate with you. You're going to respond favorably to them. You're going to agree with what they're saying, but not always. Other authors might rub you the wrong way. They might say something that you think is wrong. They might make an argument that you strongly disagree with, and that's fine. You get to evaluate what they're saying. You get to evaluate how they are saying it, how effective they are, how successful these essays are. You get to be judges because you are members of the audience. You are reading them. You are reading them actively. You are thinking about them critically. So that means that you are qualified to have opinions, to have judgments. You can be a little bit judgmental when it comes to evaluating what we read. That's okay, as long as you have some basis, some evidence for your position. But don't feel like you have to pretend to like everything that we read. You certainly don't have to agree with all of the authors that we read. And you get to evaluate the quality of their work as you see it. You get to sort of evaluate the value also. Are they accomplishing their goals? Are they contributing something worthwhile? In some cases, you might say yes. In other cases, you might say no. And then finally, we want to be skeptical sometimes. To be skeptical just means that you're not immediately accepting or believing everything an author says. You might push back a little bit on certain claims, certain statements. You might question certain things that an author is saying. You might not completely disagree, but you're just not sure. You want to think more about it. You might have questions about it. That's fine. You might just outright disagree. Like I said, you might just be totally opposed to some of what these authors are saying, and that's fine too. But a healthy dose of skepticism is usually a good thing. You don't want to just automatically disbelieve everybody, but you don't have to accept everything that you read. You can certainly dig deeper, think more. You can push back on certain things while agreeing with others. But to be skeptical ultimately means that you're probably going to arrive at your own original conclusions about what the text means. You don't just have to have somebody else tell you what it means. You're going to sort of figure that out for yourself. So all of these qualities work together. If you're asking questions, if you're evaluating, and you're being a little bit skeptical, that means you are critically thinking. You are arriving at original conclusions. You are producing original work. So really, for us, we just want to think in depth about what we read. We want to be able to talk or write about what we read. We want to arrive at original points. We want to arrive at our own original findings instead of just relying on other pre-existing findings. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to cover here in week 1. So again, we're going to use the Area 51 article to practice our active reading techniques. And I also just want you guys to read that intro chapter in 50 essays to sort of reinforce what I've just been talking about with active reading and critical thinking. And they also talk a little bit about the writing process. I don't want to get into that yet, but we will talk about it soon. Again, just remember that reading is a process. It takes time. And writing is also a process. It takes time. It's not something that we can always create. We can't, do all of our writing in a single hour or in a single day. In some cases, particularly with our big papers, we're going to be spending a lot more time, an entire week, maybe multiple weeks, working on outlining, drafting, revising, editing, all of these different stages of the writing process. So we'll talk a little bit more about the writing process when we get closer to working on essay 1, our first big essay, which is, like we said, the narrative. But just be aware that, writing and reading are often difficult. They involve multiple steps. They can often be long processes. So a big key in this class is to not get frustrated. You need to have a little bit of patience. It's okay if you haven't mastered everything right away. We're going to work through stuff. We're going to take our time on the big essays. We're going to be practicing on a weekly basis. So it takes time to get good at something. Remember that. You guys know that. Everybody had some skills, still has skills, in all kinds of different walks of life. But to get good at anything, no matter what it is, sports, musical instruments, writing, reading, no matter what it is, to get good at it, we have to practice. So that's a big part of this class. We have weekly writing practice, weekly reading practice, and we will see results. So please communicate any questions to me, and I will see you guys next week.